Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is Andre Restaino. I'm the Managing Director of the ISA Security Compliance Institute. We've invited a guest, Toby Colquhoun, to do a presentation on the cybersecurity market. I'll mention a couple things about our program on the front end, but I'll also let everybody know, due to the large number of participants, we keep all the phones muted. So what you can do is there is a question tab on your control bar. So along the way, if you'll just type in your questions at the end, we'll have a question and answer session, and Toby or myself we'll do the best we can to get your question answered. So I'll just start by mentioning our program. The ISA Security Compliance Institute runs cybersecurity certification for control system products. That's called ISA Secure. It's an ISO IEC Guide 65 conformance scheme. We have 2 labs that have been stood up to do certifications on behalf of ISA Security Compliance Institute. Again, ISO, they're accredited ISO IEC Guide 65, transitioning to 17065 by next September. They're also accredited to 17025 lab operations. So I won't provide a lot of detail, but you can go to our website and get more. Toby, if you can advance to the next slide. So we've got 3 certifications currently available: embedded device security assurance. We're certifying finite control elements, embedded devices, system security assurance, and we're certifying entire control systems. It may include the safety instrumented system and other components and subsystems. And then we also do an organizational certification called Security Development Lifecycle Assurance, in which we evaluate development organizations' lifecycle processes and confirm that specific cybersecurity requirements are addressed in the life cycle. So that's all I'll say about our program, and at this point I'll introduce Toby, who's our speaker from IHS. Toby is a senior analyst at the industrial group at IHS Technology. He's authored reports on a variety of subjects, including industrial communication, operator terminals, embedded computing, and the like. He holds a chemistry degree from the University of Leeds. So I'll go ahead and let Toby pick up at this point and begin the presentation on the cybersecurity market.
Thanks a lot, Andre. So good morning, everybody. As Andre said, my name is Toby Colquhoun. I'm a senior analyst with the industrial group at IHS Technology. Today, I will be speaking about the findings from one of our recently published reports on industrial cybersecurity. The talk will last for about 30 minutes, and as Andre mentioned, there's an opportunity to ask some questions at the end. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with IHS, just some very brief background. IHS is a leading provider of information, analytics, and expertise. Although I work as part of the technology team, our organization goes far beyond this. We're a leading provider of information to a number of verticals at all parts of the value chain. As a company, we believe every decision matters, and we have a variety of tools that can help you, no matter your industry and no matter your job title. This slide just has some examples of the industries we cover and the information that we provide to those industries. We like to say that we cover everything from microchips to cargo ships. From a personal perspective, when I'm writing my reports, this is a tremendous resource. So just as some examples for this specific cybersecurity report, I was able to leverage the expertise of my colleagues within technology who cover areas like PLCs and DCS, but also the expertise of my colleagues within the economics group who have CapEx and OpEx data in a variety of regions and in a variety of industries. So that was all I planned to cover on the company background side. So it's important to state exactly what we're looking at here. The scope of this report is purely looking at the industrial cybersecurity markets, the products and services you use to secure control systems and field devices against a variety of internal and external threats. So my comments do not pertain to the IT security side, which of course is important, but just not what we're looking at here today. There are two pieces to this report. The first is, the first part I'll show you is our supplier statistics, measuring the sales revenue and providing a projection for that revenue. And to do this, to collect this information, I reached out to the supply community and conducted numerous interviews and gathered questionnaire data. And that's what we'll be looking at next. The other piece of it, which is important to bear in mind, is that we also conducted an end-user survey of the asset owner community to get their opinion as a second source on what's going on. And we'll go into that into more detail. So, if you like, this is the headline figure. And so all I've done is graph global sales for the industrial cybersecurity industry for all product types, and broken it out by major industry type. A few interesting points here. First, we see in terms of customers, the market is fairly consolidated with the top four, industries accounting for about 2/3 of spend, and we see areas like discrete automation way underrepresented in terms of what they should be doing compared to what they are doing. Machinery just making it into the top 5 there. Just to provide a bit of context, we found last year the global market size for all products was $600 million and is projected to rise to $1.2 billion by 2019, equating to a CAGR of 12% over that period. So solid but not exactly spectacular growth. What's interesting is that if you compare that 600 million to the sales of control systems, so once again, if you look at areas like PLCs and DCS and RTU, last year sales reached about 10 billion to 15 billion just in those categories. And so what we see is that cybersecurity is relatively immature, just 5 to 4% of that total spend, and is even smaller in the context of all the sales of those products which have ever taken place. As I'm sure all the people listening are aware, many of these control systems have very long life cycles, and there's a huge installed base which needs to be secured. This slide breaks out exactly the same data, but provides a bit more information on the product mix. The point I really wanted to make was that we see the ratio of hardware, software, and services stay fairly constant over time. A few areas to highlight where we do see some higher growth. First is application whitelisting, which today is being largely used just at a testing level, but our projection is that over the next 5-6 years, it will gain far more traction than it has now. In the second two areas, we see quite high growth within the services segment. So the first one I wish to highlight is design. Today, we see assessment as one of the largest market opportunities within the services space, but increasingly we see value in companies and consultants who can tell asset owners not only what's wrong, but also how to remediate those problems, what are the best practices. And then the final segment is training. It's a bit of an industry cliche, but we talk about securing people, processes, and technology. Obviously, people are the most troublesome piece of this, and we see external providers reacting appropriately by offering a number of courses in a variety of areas. So that was what I planned to say on the supplier side. And the next couple of slides purely relate to the user survey. So what we did for this part of the research, we sent out a request to 110,000 engineers working with the IHS Global Spec organization, who have a tremendous mailing list. And in return, we received about a 1% response rate of completed questionnaires from a variety of industries, people in a variety of job roles, and people around the world. So no clear demographic in terms of who took the survey, but very representative of the total industry. So, two of the key questions we asked and what the supply community really wants to know, what are the drivers and what are the inhibitors that are affecting this market? And what we did was we asked our participants to rank these various drivers in terms of importance. And then I've just put the 3 most important for drivers and inhibitors respectively. And I think what's really interesting about this question is what doesn't appear. So if we think about drivers, we hear lots in the news about the insurance industry or the threat from fines or the effect of regulation that really has driven this market. But if you look at the actual responses from the user base, it's really those classic concerns that really predominate. And it's the same picture again if you look at the inhibitors. So once again, if you read the media, you'd expect to see things like key decision makers don't understand the problem, or there's tension between operations and IT, or it simply isn't perceived as a problem within the organization at the operations level. But once again, we see the more classic gating factors becoming much more important than the non-traditional ones, which is very interesting from my side. Another key question we asked the user base is, which standards do they follow? Once again, this has received lots of interest in the press, the various standards that are out there. Important to provide a bit of context on this question. So I've only graphed the responses of asset owners and respondents who are specifically interested in using a standard, and by far the most common response we had was that the respondent either doesn't know if they're participating in a standard or that they don't plan to adopt a standard. So the people that are adopting the standard within the next 3 years are, relatively speaking, the minority. But within that minority, IEC 62443 has gained the most traction, followed by NERC CIP and NIST respectively. To give a bit of color on that 13% other, that was actually a writing question, so respondents could specify exactly what they're referring to. So that was a whole mix of industry-specific standards like CFATs or NEI within the nuclear industry, but then by far the most common response was companies claiming their own specific internal standard that doesn't have an external name. So just a few comments to finish off before we go on to the questions. Once again, I'd like to emphasize that the cybersecurity market, the industrial cybersecurity market, is relatively modest in the context of automation, but will grow well. My expectation is that over the next few years, growth will especially be driven by emerging markets, which punch a little below their weight at the moment. And there's a few more details on that on the next slide. Second point is that we don't exist in a vacuum. Although the industrial space has a relatively staid reputation and is characterized by extreme conservatism, there are a number of technologies out there that are on the horizon and are slowly gaining some traction. So some examples, virtualization, more limited to the development and testing side today, but has tremendous advantages in terms of saving CapEx and potentially saving weight depending on the application. Industrial Ethernet, once again, it's no longer a novelty for people to ditch their serial and Ethernet protocols and adopt Industrial Ethernet in some cases all the way down to field devices. And also wireless, especially on the measurement side, has gained lots of traction. Third point, a bit more speculatively, I expect over the next few years for companies to get a lot better, or I should say the entire asset owner and regulators and security services community to get a lot better at sharing information. So today we're very siloed. Today there's not a lot of incentives for companies to disclose successful attacks. So we're really using all of these teaching moments. An interesting paradigm is the airline industry. So not only are all accidents investigated, but also near misses as well. And obviously the consequence of that learning is that air travel is the safest in the world. Obviously there are some tremendous practical problems to overcome in terms of how exactly the industry safely exchanges information. Asset owners don't want their competitors to know that they've suffered equipment downtime. They don't want their shareholders to know. But my overall impression is that I'd be astonished within the next 5-6 years if there wasn't more information sharing on a more systematic basis. This is my last slide and really pertains to my previous point. So what I've done is I've graphed that 600 million spend last year in terms of ship to location, and that's in figure 6. Then in figure 7, I've pulled out some information from some reports which have been conducted by my colleagues, and I've graphed the control system market once again by ship to location, once again for 2013 sales for last year, and it's just hardware only. What we see is that compared to the spend you'd expect, which you'd expect it to parallel the control system spend, the Americas is a bit overweight in terms of where you'd expect it to be. EMEA is where roughly what you'd expect, and Asia Pacific is way underweight in terms of what companies should be doing compared to what they are doing. My expectation is that will change over time. All regions will grow well, but we'll see relatively high growth in the emerging markets, especially India and China. That was my final question. As Andre mentioned, in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a way to ask questions. While we wait for questions, I've just put up some of the responses to the open question, which was part of our web user survey, which I mentioned earlier. Just put up 3 of the most, or some of the most interesting ones of the hundreds of comments we received. And I'd also like to mention that if you enjoyed this talk today, I'll be giving another talk at our Industrial Automation Conference in London, which is in October later this year. And I'd like to invite anybody listening to attend. In addition to cover cybersecurity, we'll also be covering a variety of hot topics in the automation industry like IoT and networking and so on. Interesting talks for anyone that needs a working knowledge of the industry. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Andre and Mike.
Thanks, Toby. Okay, a couple things. Some of the participants asked if these slides would be available. The answer is yes. We will post these slides on the isasecure.org website, so the slides will be available, and also the recorded version of this webinar is available. That should be available by the end of today. We usually get them turned around pretty quickly. Somebody asked, what is IoT? What does that mean? That means Internet of Things. And then there was a question about details about the customers, clients you interviewed. You know, who do you have a better, a more detailed profile of who they are? I guess by industry, company size, that sort of thing.
I'm not able to divulge any names, but I can say that, as you'd expect, there are a huge number of suppliers in this space, and there are a huge number of technologies. So we interviewed a variety of people of all sizes, everybody from automation equipment vendors, IT guys, defense primes, more kind of specialists that purely operate in this space, like industrial defender, consultancies. It's really a whole mix across the board.
Yeah, so there's probably there's a couple other questions, and one of them was what countries were respondents from. So one participant's interested if NERC-CIP compliance was the only response from U.S.-based respondents.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that there's no one clear response that there's no one clear respondent profile. By far the most important was the United States. With regard to that question about was it just the United States that are planning to follow NERC-CIP, I've not actually cross-tabbed that analysis, but if they wanted to follow up with me offline, I'd be happy to help, but it's not something that I immediately have to hand. Please feel free just to give me a call or send me an email, and I'd be delighted to see what I can do to help.
Yeah, and this is a question that's actually just from me. I noticed that the standards that were mentioned were 62443 NERC-CIP. The one that I didn't see, maybe it was in your responses, was the ISO 27001. Did that show up anywhere?
Once again, I'd have to check. There are quite a few different write-in responses, but once again, maybe another good one to follow up offline to get the idea of what the tally is of those other responses versus the level of respondents. Right.
And another question, you can confirm this for me. One of the participants asked, what was the 2013 market size mentioned in the first market slide? I think you said 600 million. Was that the right figure?
That's right, yes. So $600 million in the last calendar year, rising to a projected $1.2 billion by 2019.
All right, thank you. Then another question, are there any government regulations having a greater impact than the existing and evolving international standards?
So the question is, which standards are being adopted by which countries, or?
No, this is specific about government regulations. So, for instance, in the U.S., we've got NERC regulations. Are there other, I guess, analogous ones, say, in the European Union or China or other geographies or countries?
Okay, no, that is a really great question. So that really comes to the heart of an issue. So in the initial slides, why is power so important? As you might expect, a lot of those investments have been driven by NERC-CIP. So it's a reasonable question to ask: is what else is out there? So today we see fairly limited legislation. So there's some in Malaysia, there's some in the Gulf states like Qatar. But in terms of actual legislation, it's extremely limited. There is, we didn't mention CFAT. CFAT is pretty important as well. But most of the investment is really driven by asset owners realizing they're vulnerable or they've experienced an event and not necessarily compelled by legislation.
Right. So for folks who aren't familiar, the CFATS is a chemical industry regulation. Do you recall what the CFAT stands for?
I think it's chemical facilities, anti-terrorism. I'd need to look that up myself.
Okay.
But it's brought in the wake of 9/11 when they were looking at this. That really, started off the whole industry in terms of like people have known. Devices have been insecure for a long time, so post 9/11 is when the people started to take this more seriously.
Yeah, chemical facilities, anti-terrorism standards. Thank you from one of the participants, and also one of the participants asked if you have an idea of what major threats are expected.
I would say that in general, most organizations are most concerned about the insider threat rather than the external threats. And that's purely because, organizations have, disgruntled employees or ones that seem to gain an advantage. So I would say that is definitely perceived as the most important threat today. and my expectation is that will continue.
And another participant asked if you collected any statistics on revenue losses that were due to cyber attacks.
No, that's once again a really interesting question. So we know that lots of insurers have very tentatively begun to put together actuarial tables to try to quantify this, but it's pretty difficult because in some ways a lot of these systems are special. The attacks are different, and it's very difficult to quantify. And also there are some tremendous reasons not to disclose anything. So all I can really say is that we know from experience that it's tremendously expensive to remediate these problems once they've occurred, and prevention's far better than the cure. An interesting article I came across, interesting journal publication, was, what's the effect of chemical incidents on the stock market, and what the academics found that did it was that, as you might expect, it had a pretty significant impact on the stock price, especially if you consider that these companies have a markup in the billions, and obviously that's just the indirect effects.
And I recall you mentioned application whitelisting as one of the major items that there was going to be spend on. Do you have any other details on what's going to be spent in cybersecurity products and services next few years?
Yeah, sure. So today I just showed a snapshot of some of the information that we have, but if the person asking the question wants to follow up offline and wants to have a brief call, or they'd like to just send me an email, they're very welcome to.
So another question was what's being planned in terms of sharing security incidents to improve the overall security in the industry without compromising privacy and bad press. So I know personally that there's the U.S. CERT site. They provide information about security threats. There are some other organizations who track and publish these, but I don't know if you can weigh in on that as well, Toby.
I'd say that comment was a bit more speculative. So we know today that the bad guys are better at sharing information than the good guys, and I think that really has to change. But I'd echo your comments. It's pretty limited today. Right,
and in the United States, Homeland Security has a information sharing site that you can sign up for. I believe you can find your way into that through the U.S. CERT site, and you fill out some basic information, and they do some vetting and add you to that information sharing site. Okay, are there additional questions? All right, great. I'm not seeing any additional questions. So it's about 11:34, 11:35. So Toby, thank you for the presentation, and thank you participants for taking some time out of your day to listen to Toby's talk. And like I said, this will be the recorded version of this and the slide deck will be posted up on the www.isasecure.org website. All right, have a great day.